Well, Pastor Derek Reimer is out of jail. He was put in the maximum security remand center for heckling. Now, I don't deny that heckling can be offensive. It could even be called rude. He may even ought to have been cast out of a library room if he was disrupting people who were gathered there willingly and he was messing things up. I get it, although I think they put hands on him in a way that someone else would have been charged with assault. But to charge a pastor with crimes in the criminal code, to hold him in jail where, I tell you, in this country, terrorists, accused terrorists are allowed on bail, tells you how serious a position we are in. And joining us now via Skype from Calgary is a criminal lawyer. And I hate the fact that a criminal lawyer has to be retained to fight for the freedom of a Christian pastor who simply expressed his dissent. That criminal lawyer is Ben Allison. He works for Shorey Law Firm, and he has been funded by the generous donations of people to the Democracy Fund. You can chip in too at SavePastorDerek.com. Ben, nice to meet you, and thanks for joining our viewers, many of whom care very much about freedom of speech and freedom of religion.
Good afternoon.
Well, thank you. And I want to brag about you. You and I have spoken once or twice on the phone. One of my favorite things about you is that you're classmates and friends with Sarah Miller, who is well known to our viewers as the tireless defender of Pastor Arthur Pawlowski. You and Sarah went to class together. She's pretty bright and she's fought hard. It's my hope, Ben, that you become a similar advocate for the case of Pastor Derek.
Yes, Sarah's a wonderful friend of mine. I did get the chance to go to law school with Sarah. We've been able to maintain touch. I count her as a friend. And yes, certainly I have been retained to fight for Mr. Reimer and all of his rights in these criminal matters, and I'm happy to do so.
Well, thank you very much. We need the help. This sounds very unusual to me. I recall the mayor, Jody Gondek, went on Twitter and had sort of a tantrum saying she rejected the, quote, reasons, and she put that in scare quotes. She rejected the reasons why police and prosecutors, she said, were not charging Pastor Derek after he was thrown out of that drag queen story hour. And after she went on that Twitter tantrum, then they did, in fact, arrest him. I mean, that just stinks of political interference to me. I don't even know how that's kosher. I mean, Danielle Smith got in trouble with the media party and the opposition for saying she would consider staying some prosecutions that weren't in the public interest against some lockdown targets. Here, the mayor practically commands the police to do her bidding, and they do it. This feels political. How has it been so far in the courts? Can you give us an update? When you've been to court for Pastor Derek, who is there representing the government? Is it a criminal prosecutor? Is there a city lawyer? Who's there on the other side? And what has politics entered into any of the conversations, including with the Justice of the Peace who granted him bail?
In terms of who is involved on the court appearances thus far, it's frankly very early on in these proceedings. Most court appearances that we've done are what I would call administrative appearances. So there are various Crown prosecutors who will speak to this matter. In terms of who's on for the city, there is a city lawyer who will be dealing with the bylaw offenses. So there's two different and separate Crown's offices who are involved because there's two distinct sets of charges. There's municipal bylaw offenses, and then there's, of course, allegations of crimes that are listed in the criminal code. In terms of politics, thankfully, that's something that I'm not obligated to get involved in and have been able to steer clear. But in these very early proceedings, nothing's been political thus far.
Okay, well, that's good to know. I found it upsetting that the mayor felt that she could command the police to fill her political wishes. That's not their role, of course. Can you tell us what the charges are? You mentioned there were some bylaw offenses, and I know the one you're referring to. We've done a show on it before. I understand there was causing a disturbance and a mischief charge. I saw reports in the media about hate crime charges as well. So far, have there been any hate crime charges or an element of hate crimes that has been mentioned by police or prosecutors?
So no, hate crime isn't an express charge in the criminal code, but there are charges within the criminal code that more appropriately would cover things that most people would consider to be a hate crime. To my knowledge, Mr. Reimer has not been charged with anything like that. The charges that he is facing under the criminal code are mischief and cause disturbance. Now, in our system, after and if Mr. Reimer is sentenced, a judge can consider whether or not the offenses relate to a hate motivation as an aggravating or a factor to be considered that would increase the penalty. So that could come into play later on, but we're far away from that. There'd have to be a finding of guilt first.
Right. Well, I certainly hope it doesn't come to that, and I find it terrifying that a Christian pastor who was not uttering threats, was not engaged in any violence or anything that we would normally call a crime, could be faced with a criminal conviction, let alone a hate crime conviction. I find that terrifying. Have you had a chance to be properly briefed by Pastor Derek? I mean, when someone's arrested and put in the clink, it's often this scurry to connect them with a lawyer. Did they have a chance to fully talk about the facts? Is the lawyer fully instructed? Have you had a chance to properly meet with your client and understand his case and give him tips already? I suppose he's been out of jail a few days now. Have you synced up with him?
Yes, I've been able to speak with Mr. Reimer. I've obtained instructions. I've explained the lay of the land, the next steps. Those are kinds of in terms of broad scopes, the conversations that we've had. Again, we're so early on in these proceedings. I don't have any disclosure yet from either of the Crown's offices. So discussions between Mr. Reimer and I are mostly centered around how to ensure he can do all that he can to abide by the conditions he's under.
That was an excerpt from the Ezra Levant Show. I'm Ezra Levant. Every weekday, I do a monologue about the topic of the day. Then I interview a fascinating guest, either in studio or via Skype. And then I read your mail, whether it's fan mail or hate mail, which is sometimes even more interesting. This is on our premium service, though, called Rebel News Plus. Go to rebelnewsplus.com. It's $8 a month or less if you buy a whole year in advance. You get my show every weeknight, plus Sheila Gunn Reid's show every week. It's called The Gun Show. It's pretty amazing. You know, we rely on you because we do not take a dime from the government. In Canada, that makes us almost unique. So please help us out and help yourself to some great journalism at rebelnewsplus.com.